My name is Elena Bell, and I was 52 years old the morning my daughter looked me in the eye and said, with a voice smooth as a blade, the greatest gift would be if you just died. The light in the kitchen was soft and unthreatening. A bowl of oranges sat in the center of the table, their skins dimpled like tiny suns. And the kettle clicked off with a small, obedient sigh. Outside, a sparrow hopped along the iron railing of the porch and shook the rain from its wings. I remember those details as clearly as the sentence that split my life into before and after. Because cruelty often arrives dressed in the ordinary, I did not throw the tea. I did not slap her or curse her or throw myself on the floor. I just set the cup on a cork coaster and watched a curl of steam wobble in the air. An old woman's breath exiting a crowded room. "Is that so?" I said, and the sparrow flew away. She was still. Beautiful in a way that always looked borrowed, like a gown she would forget to return. My rose, 30 years of face creams and dental plans and violin lessons had assembled themselves into a daughter who photographed well from any angle. But her eyes were tired with the kind of tiredness you get when you've mistaken hunger for personality. "You've never given me anything I've actually wanted," she said, looking at the door as if it were a mirror and she could catch herself leaving. "You give conditions, strings, guilt. What is it you want?" I asked. On the stove, the second burner clicked and failed to catch. I turned the knob to off. "Freedom," she said, then smiled. "And the house. And the accounts you dangle. And the silence that comes after funerals. There's an old superstition that if you accept someone's curse without flinching, it falls on them instead. I knew better. Curses have always adored me. They've nested in my sternum like drowsy blackbirds and sung when I've tried to sleep. "I'm not dead yet," I said. "You could pretend," she said, as if she were proposing a game. Pretend for once. She left the kitchen without waiting for an answer, heels cracking against the hardwood like a metronome set to fast. A minute later, the front door sighed and the house settled around me in the quiet that follows an insult. Everything becomes twice as audible. The clock on the wall counted out my pulse. The refrigerator hummed its faithful tune. In the guest room, the humidifier gurgled, unaware that it had been purchased to soothe the future of a grandchild who never came. I stood at the sink and watched the neighbor's maple shake its hands free of rain. Old trees know how to survive storms. They bend, they hoard light, they let go at the right time. And I thought of my mother, who had never learned any of that, who held on to everything until it turned to rot in her grip, who called love the work of tightening knots. I had spent my life trying to be the opposite of her. Now, at 52, I saw I had only become the opposite shape of the same thing, a shadow that obeyed its object. By noon, my decision had arrived, calm as a verdict. If my daughter wanted the silence of funerals, I would give her the silence of abandonment, which is louder and more instructive. If she wanted my death, she could have the consequences of it without the mercy. Some lessons are only visible from a distance. Some distances require you to walk away. First, I called the bank, the banker, a man who had learned how to sound unflappable while remaining deeply flappable, recited the script for withdrawing large sums. He confirmed my identity with questions that felt like rummaging through a drawer. First school, first pet, first job, and for the transfer of the trust that funds the Maple Street property, he said, softening his tone. "May I ask the reason?" "Health," I said. "I'm making provisions." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Ms. Bell, don't be." I signed where I was told to sign. And then I signed in 3 more places, and when the courier arrived, I signed for him as well, a pilgrimage of ink. By the time afternoon light began to slant across the floorboards, the house had become the kind of clean that looks like absence. My paperwork was in order. The contractor I had planned to hire to redo the upstairs bathroom would find his deposit returned in the morning. The mortgage's remaining payments would be paid off. Then the deed folded neatly into a folder labeled with my maiden name and put someplace no one would think to look until I wanted them to. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way a surgeon must feel when the tumor separates from the healthy tissue, with an almost lascivious ease. Then I packed a small suitcase. 3 dresses, 1 black, 1 blue, one that could pass for either depending on the light. A sweater my sister had knit before she forgot who I was. shoes that looked more expensive than they were. The pearl necklace my mother left me with the instruction that I wear it when I forgave her. I had not worn it. I took it anyway. I took a book of poems that had lived inside my nightstand since before Rose was born, and the photograph of my late husband holding a trout in both hands and grinning. The river behind him a sheet of light. I left the framed picture on the mantel and took the photo from inside the frame. Because I had read once that ghosts remain with the glass dot by evening. The house smelled like lemon cleanser and a decision. I wrote a note on the thick stationery Rose liked to use for thank you cards. She never actually mailed. My hand, never beautiful, looked sensible and I relished it. Rose, this is the gift you asked for. I am gone. The house is no longer funded by me. The accounts you have spent the past year presuming into your future have been dissolved or redirected to beneficiaries who do not consider my existence an inconvenience. You will find on your table a copy of the appointment I've made in your name, with a therapist, a good one, and the first dozen sessions paid for. You will also find the statement from the bank that shows the wire I sent to cover the debts you told me didn't exist. In the top drawer, the key to the attic. In the attic, the boxes you avoided, your father's letters. Read them if you want to meet a man from before you thought he had disappointed you. Read them if you want to understand the price of being believed in. You told me the greatest gift would be my death. I am giving you something greater, the honest space where my life does not do your hurting for you. Make of it what you can. I'm done making it for you. Mother reread it twice, once in the voice I used to read nursery rhymes, once in the voice I used to negotiate invoices. Then I slid it beneath a weight in the center of the dining table. My wedding ring in its little velvet box, the top open like a mouth about to speak. What I left on her table would destroy her, yes, but not by spectacle. Destruction is not always an explosion. Sometimes it is the mirror you have avoided. I slept for 3 hours in the guest room because I could not bear my bed, then woke at 3:47 in the morning. With the particular certainty grief lends to the practical. I showered, dressed, took the suitcase, and locked the front door. The porch steps creaked the way old bones greet cold. As I reached the gate, I realized I had not looked back even once. There's a myth that if you do not look back, the past cannot follow. It followed anyway, but slowly, as if it had finally learned to respect my pace. At the station, the first train out was a silver thing that looked like the future's toy. I bought a ticket to the last stop because I had no duty to return. I would ride until the track insisted we stop. The car was nearly empty. A man in a college sweatshirt slept with his mouth open. A woman in a cherry-colored coat texted in little bites, her face lit by the screen. I took a window seat and pressed my palm to the glass, as if the cold could cure my hand of its history. When the train slid free of the city, the fields opened like a confession. There was fog kneeling on the low ground, and beyond it, a line of trees so slender they looked like handwriting. My chest felt light and appalled, a house with its furniture dragged out to the curb. I reached into my purse and touched the pearls. They felt cooler than truth. I thought about the first time I realized my daughter could hurt me with skill. She was 12, and the school had organized a recital. She had been practicing Schumann stubbornly and beautifully. And the morning of the performance, she had flung open her bedroom door and announced she would not play. "You want me to be good so you can be admired," she said, daring me to deny it. It was not exactly wrong. It was not exactly right. I told her to put on her shoes. She did and played. And we both walked home carrying a version of the other that could not be spoken to. These are not the moments you report when someone asks where things began to go wrong. You talk about boyfriends, apartments, money, the slight, unplotted betrayals of adulthood. But beginnings are always earlier than the people involved allow. The train rolled through a town that wore its frost like a shawl. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine where I was going. Not a place, exactly, but a discipline. A new verb, to be gone. I had practiced so many other verbs for other people: feed, soothe, explain, repair. I would try this one now, for me. At the last stop, the platform smelled like wet wood and coffee. The station was small and humbly ambitious, its ticket counter unmanned. a bulletin board announcing a missing dog and a folk concert that had already happened. I pulled my suitcase behind me down the main street until I found a motel, with a vacancy sign flickering. The clerk was a young woman with a saint's patience and an adolescent's boredom. When I asked for a week, she looked surprised. When I handed over my card, the surprise softened. Money is a lubricant for friction. I had discovered it is also a solvent for certain kinds of memory. The room was clean in the way that means no one loves it. A bed that could take the shape of any sleeper. A painting of a lighthouse that watched without judging. A desk where I placed the poems, the pearls, the photograph of my husband without the frame. He grinned at me from the river as if he had been given a private joke. And it was time to let me in on it. You would have loved this, I told him. Or you would have hated it charismatically. I slept. This time all the way to the hour when light invents edges. I woke hungry in a way that reminded me I had a body and it was still reporting for duty. At the diner next door I ordered eggs and coffee and something the waitress called a smile pancake, which arrived with a syrup grin and two blueberry eyes. She refilled my cup twice without asking. When I smiled in thanks, it felt like a foreign language I remembered suddenly. You passing through? She asked, on her third visit. I'm arriving, I said. She nodded like a woman who had arrived somewhere once and survived it. We're better than we look, she said. Worse than we brag. After breakfast, I walked. The town had the usual essentials of a life you think you'll only need briefly, a hardware store that smelled like persistence, a church with a sign promising you could start over any Sunday, a library with a corkboard where the index cards looked like shy birds perched in a row. I went inside and asked for a card. The librarian, a man whose beard could have kept a small village warm, handed me a form. Address? He asked. Here, I said, and wrote the name of the motel. He did not flinch. Perhaps he had seen many rivals. Perhaps he himself had once arrived. He slid the card into a plastic sleeve and stamped a due date with the resentment of an era that liked paper more than time. I checked out a book on local trails and a novel I had always pretended I had read. The librarian handed them back like blessings. Back in the room, the telephone rang. I looked at it as if it had already accused me. It rang again, and I lifted the receiver and set it down gently on the bedspread so the ringing could keep happening without reaching me. The sound was both desperate and polite. After the seventh ring, it gave up, which is a lesson most people never learn, and the silence returned to its original species. I waited until noon to call the therapist whose name I had left on the table. I did not explain who I was. I only said I was calling to confirm Rose's appointment would be honored. Whether she stormed in or slunk, whether she wept or demolished the furniture, whether she said yes or no with the same mouth, the receptionist's voice was efficient and kind in the way that suggested years of catastrophes had lined up and been processed without drama. We will be here, she said. I won't, I said, and hung up at around 3 in the afternoon. The motel door trembled with a knock that had practice to it. I waited, the knock repeated, this time softer, as if whoever stood there worried they had already scared me away. When I opened the door, a man in a charcoal suit held up a badge that gleamed like an unflattering truth. Miss Bell? He said. Yes, I'm Detective Warren. Your daughter has reported you missing. She found the note, I said. He blinked. She did. I am not missing, I said. I am elsewhere. May I come in? You may stand there. I felt the pearls in my pocket. A small oracle that told me only what I already knew. He cleared his throat. A sound like someone stepping on a dry leaf. Your daughter is concerned for your safety. My daughter is concerned for her inheritance, I said. And before he could object, I added, it has been removed from harm's way. He looked at me with a gaze that had learned the difference between the dramatic and the decisive. Will you call her? I shook my head. I have given her all the words she needs, families, he murmured, the way a man might say weather. Exactly, I said. He tucked his notebook away. I'll close the file as located. If she threatens to open anything else, call me. Or don't. He handed me a card, which I slid into the drawer with the Gideon Bible and a menu for a pizza place that spelled anchovies like a disease. After he left, the room felt larger. I lay on the bed and tried to measure the space between myself and the woman I had been yesterday. It was not a chasm. It was a corridor with doors I had never noticed, and behind each, a room I had already paid for that evening. As the sky cooled to a color I could not name, I took my husband's photograph to the river that pretended to be a creek. I sat on a bench and listened to the water invent its argument. And I told him the story as if it had happened to someone I loved but could no longer protect. I told him about the maple's hands shaking rain, about the banker with his softening tone, about the pearls in my pocket and the detective with his practical mercy. I told him, finally, about the girl we had raised and the woman she had become. And I did not apologize for the parts that were my fault. In the telling, a small mercy unfolded. I believed myself when I returned to the room. The telephone was quiet. I placed the receiver back in its cradle like a baby who had finally slept. I took the pearls from my pocket and laid them beside the photograph so they could keep each other in good company. Then I opened the book of poems to a line I remembered without ever having underlined it. To begin is to be forgiven for not beginning sooner. I slept without dreams. In the morning, I woke with a plan that startled me by its sobriety. I would stay a week. I would rent a small apartment if the town still wanted me. After I'd walked its length 10 more times, I would find work that did not require me to explain my past or borrow anyone's future. I would learn to befriend to people I had not given birth to. I would practice the verb I had chosen until it was not a performance but a posture, and then, once the muscles of new life no longer trembled, I would write to my daughter not to bargain, not to scold, but to testify. Not to beg her to love me, but to tell her how I loved her before she was anyone, and how I had learned, late but finally, to love the woman who had survived being her mother on the third day. A letter arrived at the motel with my name written the way children write the names of saints. The return address was the house I had left. I held the envelope at arm's length as if it were a snake deciding whether to strike. Then I slid a butter knife along the edge and shook the contents into my hand. It was my note, folded back to me, and beneath it, a single sentence in my daughter's hand. You always make me the villain because you're afraid to admit you don't know how to be the hero. I sat on the bed and let the accusation settle. It took the shape of something familiar, the way I had narrated my life as a saga of duties, performed nobly against the tide of ingratitude. I had been wronged, yes. I had also been comfortable inside that wrongness. Heroes rescue. Villains harm. What, then, are the people who walk away? Survivors, cowards? Priests of a private temple? I took out a pen and wrote my reply on the back of the letter I had once written. I did not edit it for elegance. I did not rehearse it for effect. I wrote it for accuracy. Rose, I am not a hero. I am not a villain. I am your mother. I am a woman who wants to live before she dies. If you want the story to have only 2 parts, choose one and be glad. If you want the truth, come find me when you have something else to ask besides for everything. I sealed the envelope and addressed it to the house I had bought and now withheld, at the post office. The clerk weighed it with the same gravity he must bring to wedding invitations and overdue taxes. Anything fragile? He asked. Only the future, I said, and paid for the stamp on the walk back. The sky had opened into a blue so sharp it felt like advice. I passed the library and the church and the bulletin board that had grown a new index card, asking for volunteers to plant daffodils along the river. I took a tab with a number and a date. When I reached the motel, I taped it to the mirror. It turns out that when you stop being necessary, you become visible. The owner of the diner asked if I could help with inventory on Saturdays for cash. The librarian asked if I might want to lead a reading group for the book I had checked out, and then shyly extended the due date without the stamp. The woman in the cherry coat from the train turned up at the laundromat and asked if I knew how to fold fitted sheets without swearing. I know how to stop halfway and laugh, I said. And she said that was close enough. On the 6th night, as I was writing in the motel's stiff-backed binder of notes to myself, a practice I had invented to trick the void into being a page, the phone rang again. This time I knew who it was before the second ring. I listened to it fill the room, then lifted the receiver like a priest lifting a chalice. Mother. she said, and her voice was smaller than the kitchen had allowed. Yes, I said. Did you really cancel everything? Yes, did you really pay for a stranger to listen to me? She won't be a stranger long. Silence traveled between us like a careful animal. I found the letters, she said at last. And then the sound I had been both hoping for and dreading, the first broken laugh of a person. Discovering her history has its own handwriting. He wrote as if he wasn't already dying. He wasn't, I said. Not of what the doctors understood. You mean us, she said, not unkindly. I mean grief, I said. And then I did the hardest thing a mother can do after the second hardest. I let the silence stay. I did not fill it with comfort or accusation. I allowed it the dignity of forming its own shape. When she spoke again, her voice had remembered its child. Are you coming back? No, I said. But I could meet you. Where there is no back to return to. Where? Here, I said, and looked at the card on the mirror, the one with the daffodils. On Saturday. Bring shoes you can ruin. She didn't answer. The line clicked. The dial tone returned like a faithful dog. I sat on the bed and stared at the pearls until they looked like small moons. Saturday came like a promise I hadn't thought the world could keep. I wore the blue dress that could be black and the sweater my sister had knit before she forgot me. And I tied the pearls around my throat not as forgiveness but as lineage. The riverbank bloomed with buckets and trowels and the smell of wet soil. Strangers smiled at one another with the intimacy of labor. I had almost convinced myself she would not come when a car door slammed and the air changed the way it does when weather decides. Something Rose stepped onto the grass, wearing old sneakers and a sweatshirt that once belonged to a boyfriend she had outgrown with admirable clarity. She did not look at me as she took a trowel from the supply table. She did not look. We found a spot where the ground yielded easily and knelt. The earth was cold enough to warn and warm enough to forgive. We dug small, obedient holes, and placed the bulbs with their noses pointed upward toward a spring they could not yet imagine. It feels like burying hope, she said. It is, I said. But in the good way. We planted in silence until our knees complained. Finally she asked, Are you really 52? I am, I said. You don't look it. You don't sound like someone who wants me dead, I said. And glanced at her and she flinched, but not away. I was cruel, she said. As if reporting a weather pattern. You were honest about your cruelty, I said. It's a start. The river ran, indifferent and in love with itself. Around us, other planters worked with the concentration of penance. A child laughed at something small and important. A dog found a stick he believed had been carved specifically for his mouth. The world, despite our wishes, continued. When our bucket was empty, we sat back on our heels and admired the brown mounds that looked like nothing, which is to say like everything before it learns its name. She wiped a streak of dirt from her cheek and grimaced. I don't know how to be your daughter without taking your life as a personal grant, she said. I don't know how to be your mother without turning love into management. I said, then maybe we begin like this, she said, and gestured at the ground. With something ugly that trusts itself, we stood. She looked at my neck. Grandma's pearls, she said. Yes, you forgave her? No, I said. I learned to be someone who didn't need to, she nodded. And for a second I saw her as a toddler again, considering whether to touch the edge of a table. I booked the therapist, she said. I hate that you knew the number. I hate that I did too, I said, and we smiled. The kind that knows its own imperfection well enough to be brave. We walked to the water. The current argued with the rocks in a language both of us understood without translation. She slipped her hand into the crook of my arm the way she used to when rain surprised us. And we had one umbrella. It felt like a choice, which is better than any gift. I wanted to say I was proud. I wanted to say I had needed her to be good so I could be righteous. And I had released her from that theater. I wanted to say everything a mother rehearses and never performs. Instead, we stood and watched the brown river pretend to be silver under the late light. And I thought, with an ease that startled me, that it is possible to leave and to remain, to lose and to keep. To die in the way a life dies when it becomes a larger one. When we turned back toward the planted bulbs, the soil looked already a shade more hopeful, as if promise itself had a color only the newly honest could see. I squeezed her arm once and let go, and we walked together toward the work we had done and the work that waited, both of us finally, at last arriving. I did not go back to the motel after we planted the last bulb. We stood together near the folding table where volunteers signed out trowels. Our palms streaked with the same river-dark soil, and I felt a small, unglamorous click inside me, like a drawer sliding shut. Something had ended. Something else, which would not make good television, had begun. Rose pulled a granola bar from the pocket of her sweatshirt and snapped it in half. "You always told me to break bread with people," she said, offering me the smaller piece. "I did," I said, and took the smaller piece without performance. We walked the path back toward town and passed a pair of teenagers skating in slow, defiant loops. One of them had dyed hair the color of the cherry coat I'd seen on the train. The other had knees scabbed with honest practice. The town looked like a place that forgave you for not being the person you'd bragged you were. Rose slowed in front of the library. "Dad used to try to get me to read in the summers. Do you remember?" "I do. I always resented it like a chore." She looked through the glass as if school might still be in session. I told myself he wanted me to be someone else. But maybe he just wanted me to have somewhere to go when love was confusing. "Books are a form of public shelter," I said. "You could have said that then." "I didn't have the words," I said. And it didn't feel like a confession so much as an invoice finally paid. We stopped at the diner because hunger was a truth more urgent than pride. The waitress sat down to Waters and pretended not to recognize me from earlier in the week. Rose sat across from me, her shoulders squared in the way of people who have rehearsed a courtroom in their heads. "I sold the piano last year," she said, as the waitress poured our coffee. "I told you the moving company broke it." "That was a lie," I assumed. "You didn't say anything. What would have been useful to say?" I asked. She stirred her coffee as if auditioning for restraint. "That you were disappointed." "I was," I said. "And relieved." She looked up sharply. "I wanted you to choose something you would not weaponize against me." The piano had become a hostage. She laughed then, unexpectedly and without malice. "We're to people who would have made excellent lawyers and terrible jurors." We ate without the old choreography of accusation and atonement. When the plates were cleared, she pushed her water glass a fraction of an inch toward me. I called the number. "The therapist." The receptionist sounded like a woman who has seen 1,000 kinds of tornado. "They wear comfortable shoes," I said. "It's their sacrament. Tuesday at 4, she said. "Will you? Do you want to know what happens?" "I want you to have a room where my curiosity can't rearrange the furniture," I said. "But if you want to tell me, I will not treat your telling as rent." Outside, the sky was blue in the way that makes you suspicious. We stood by the door, pretending to fuss with our sleeves to avoid the theater of parting. Finally she said, "I should drive back." I nodded. "I have inventory to count in the morning." She blinked. "You got a job?" "Temporarily. Numbers in boxes. It feels like proof something exists." She stepped closer, small as when she had borrowed the sound of my shoes when she learned to walk. "Do you have a place here? I mean, other than the motel?" "Not yet. Get one," she said, and then hurried as if afraid the generosity would evaporate. "Elise, a mailbox with your name on it. Somewhere I can send letters without imagining a corridor of doors." "I'll look," I said. She reached for me and stopped. The way a person stops at a yellow light and feels both virtuous and cheated. "I said something unforgivable," she whispered. "You asked for the wrong thing in a language I taught you," I said. "I'll be in town next Saturday. The bulbs won't need us, but the river will enjoy the company." She nodded. It always does. When she left, the space she vacated felt like a page turned, not a hole. I walked to the post office and wrote my name on a form for a P.O. box. The clerk handed me two brass keys that looked like cartoon promises. I pressed them into my palm and imagined a life measured not by who had my house key but by which door I could open alone. The motel owner's nephew, an eager boy with a haircut that made his mother proud, pointed me toward a bulletin board near the hardware store. "You want something small, quiet, not haunted," he said, as if I'd said any of those words aloud. "Try Mrs. Dalrymple's over the bakery." Mrs. Dalrymple turned out to be a widow with cat-shaped magnets on her refrigerator. and a nose that could smell insincerity even through polite laughter. She led me up a flight of stairs so steep they legislated propriety, and opened the door to an apartment that had learned the skill of being exactly adequate. A table with room for two hurts and a triumph. A couch that had believed in the bodies that had sunk into it. A window that gave the alley dignity. No smoking, no parties, she said. But grief is allowed if it leaves by morning. I can afford it, I said. And told her the price before she could pretend she was asking for less. You can move in tonight, she said. And when I lifted my suitcase over the threshold, I felt a catechism I had forgotten come back to me line by line. This is mine. This is enough. This, too, is a home. I bought plates from the thrift store and a kettle from the hardware shop that smelled like fathers, who loved quietly. At the library, I checked out a cookbook for one and a pamphlet on local bus routes. I folded the motel receipt into a small square and placed it at the bottom of the trash, like a retired talisman. Before bed, I opened the attic of my mind and removed the word exile. I replaced it with latitude on Tuesday at 3:58. My phone vibrated with a message from Rose, going in. I stared at the two words until their brave brevity hurt me, then turned my phone face down on the table and made tea. At 5:11, another message. I talked until my throat forgot how to be a fist. Thank you for paying for that lesson, I wrote, not alone. Not a bribe, a door. She responded with an emoji of a key, which felt like we were two diplomats speaking in a second language we were eager to master. Letters began to arrive in my P.O. box. Sometimes two in a week, sometimes none for a fortnight. The first ones were short, the way injured animals test the ground before running. She confessed small, glittering crimes, stealing lip balm from a pharmacy when she was 13, pretending to be sick to get out of a family picnic, where she knew she would be given the job of entertaining cousins, while adults entertained grievance. I did not absolve. I replied with my own unheroic truths. The afternoon I told her father I wanted a life without anyone needing me. The night I stayed too long at a co-worker's birthday party because laughter had forgotten my name, and then remembered it, briefly, as if by accident. We did not apologize in those letters. We named. Naming is the ceremony people mistake for blame. The thing I had left on her table worked its slow, unspectacular destruction. The copy of The Wire to pay her debts meant 3 men stopped calling her with voices that spoke, as if they were owed her breath. The deed locked away where she could not get it taught her that walls exist without her consent. The velvet box, open to the air, made her write months later, on paper that still smelled like the house. I didn't know your absence would be the only honest thing you ever gave me. I took the Saturday inventory job permanent and added mornings at the library. Shelving returns. The librarian with the comprehensively useful beard taught me the geography of Dewey, as if he were proudly introducing me to cousins. This town believes in order, he said, but not so much it forgets delight. On Wednesdays, I led the reading group. People came with their shy loaves of opinion and went home looking lightened. A woman with hands that had learned patience through quilting said, after one chapter, I thought I wanted plot. Turns out I wanted permission. By spring, the first daffodils broke the ground like a group making an entrance. Rose stood with me on the path, both of us pretending not to cry. It's indecent, she said. That yellow, it's proof the world over does beauty to practice for grief, I said. She laughed. You could write fortune cookies. I'm writing a fortune, I said. And learning not to eat it. Her therapy did not turn her into a different person. It stripped her habits of their costumes and set them down in the light. She began to say strange sentences that were shaped like responsibility. She admitted she had wanted the house the way gamblers want a sure thing, to stop the noise. She told me, over soup at the diner, that envy had been her mother tongue. I told her that martyrdom had been mine. We agreed to learn a third language together, one in which love was not a ledger. In May, she asked to see the letters from the attic, the originals, not my memory. I want to smell the paper, she said, like a scholar, like a child. I had put them in a safety deposit box in town, because some ghosts behave better if they believe in fluorescent lighting and sign-in sheets. We sat at a table in the bank while the notary pretended he could not hear us, and we read. Your mother believes the world is a series of tests her father had written in one. I believe it's a series of rooms. I want you to feel permitted to walk into any of them and say, I belong. He had written about my laugh and about the sound of Rose, as an infant modulating the pitch of her cry like a singer tuning an instrument. He had written about wanting to move far away and then staying, which is a more difficult migration. He had not written about dying, though the dates announced the swift approach of that shore. Rose traced a sentence with her finger and asked, why did you never tell me he used to steal sugar packets from restaurants and line them up by color? I forgot, I said, which was true and unforgivable. Or I remembered and thought the story made him smaller when it actually makes him real. She lifted a letter to her face and inhaled, as if grief had a scent. I hate that I learned to narrate my pain as a way to make you pay attention. I hate that I made attention an invoice, I said. We were two accountants, balancing a ledger that refused to close after the bank. We walked to the river that still pretended to be a creek. The daffodils nodded in a wind that seemed to approve of our efforts without offering a grade. Rose said, I read somewhere that daffodils survive because they store food in their bulbs. A kind of underground pantry. We were always good at pantries, I said. We just filled them with the wrong things. We stood a long time in a silence I would not have traded for applause. Then she reached into her bag and took out a smaller velvet box. The kind jewelers arm with euphemisms. There's no ring, she said quickly. I'm not proposing anything ridiculous. She opened it. Inside lay the key to the attic at the house. I don't need it, I said. I do, she said. I want to be the person who returns it. I closed the lid, handed it back, and watched her put the box away like a woman who understood artifacts. Keep it, I said. When you're tempted to ask for the wrong thing, open it and look at the absence, she nodded. I will, that summer. The town threw a small festival that called itself a fair with an ambition I admired. There were paper lanterns and a band that knew more chord progressions than the crowd deserved. I manned the used book table and Rose took tickets for the pie raffle. Scribbling names with the impatience of someone who had once believed money solved the problem of time. Children ran with the heroic intent of people who have not yet learned how heavy loyalty can be. In the middle of a song that claimed it remembered the 70s better than the 70s remembered themselves, Rose leaned across the table and said, Do you ever think about giving the house back? Sometimes, I said, but not as an apology. As a decision you would have to agree to like a contract. I don't know if I'm ready, she said. I don't know if I am either, I said. Readiness is a word furniture. Uses to judge a room. We took home the blueberry pie we did not deserve to win and ate it on my apartment floor with 2 forks and a seriousness that would have made strangers laugh. You were always serious about food, she said, because food does not lie, I said. It either feeds you or it doesn't. Will you ever tell me who the beneficiaries were? She asked, the fork hovering in midair like a question. When it won't feel like an invitation to resent them, I said. For now, you can know this, they are people who used my life without asking the house for rent. Charity, she said, with a tone trying to be neutral, not only, I said. Also a scholarship and a woman who needs to leave a man. Also a church that feeds people without telling them what to believe. Also the library, she smiled, and it did not cut. I like the library, I know, I said, and we ate. And there was nothing complicated about the sweetness. In August, after her 7th therapy session and my first remarkably calm dentist appointment in a decade, Rose handed me a stack of papers. A budget, she said. I want you to look at it and then pretend you didn't. I read it without commentary. The way a priest reads sins, and then I did as I was told. She had cut things that had once defined her and added things that sounded like a body. Learning the word routine without flinching. She had a line item for savings and a line item for joy, which made me believe in both. The next letter she sent was on plain paper with no perfume. It said, Mother, I want to try to love you without needing to win. I want to try to be loved by you without needing to perform. If we can't, we can at least be 2 well-dressed women who know how to leave a room before the small talk turns to cruelty. I framed it without glass and hung it above the kitchen table where the light reminded it how to be modest. In September, The maple near my old porch, my old life's nearest tree, would have shaken the rain from its hands again, and I did not see it. I imagined it without punishment. On a Thursday that smelled like pencil shavings and distance, I woke and made tea and put the pearl necklace away in a drawer lined with a scarf my sister had knit before she forgot me entirely. I wrote a letter to the woman who had taught me to confuse control with love and folded it carefully, and did not mail it. Some documents function best as ghosts. By October, the landlord downstairs had learned my coffee order, the librarian my sense of humor, the river my gait. Rose came on Sundays and we used the coin-op laundry as if it were a chapel. We spoke about small things, the neighbor's chihuahua with delusions of opera, the price of blueberries in winter, the way grief becomes a weather report you check and then dress for. Sometimes we did not speak at all. We folded fitted sheets and laughed halfway through and called it competence. One evening, as the light did the trick where it forgives everything for a quarter hour, she asked, "If I hadn't said it, if I hadn't asked you to die, would you have left?" "No," I said, and watched surprise work its way across her face like tide filling in a shore. "I would have managed. I would have made us proud in public and resentful in the kitchen. I would have taught you to hold your breath and called it stamina. Your cruelty was my rescue." She put her head on my shoulder like a person borrowing a step. "Then maybe I did give you a gift," she said, the joke not quite hiding the hope. "You did," I said. "But the thank you note will take the rest of my life to write." We sat there, two women who had survived a house without burning it down to prove a point. Outside, the river made its old argument, and this time it sounded like a hymn for people who no longer needed to be right to be saved. Winter came quietly, snow softening the roofs of the small town I had begun to call mine. My daughter and I wrote less often but spoke more, as if silence had learned to work for us instead of against. She no longer asked for the house, and I no longer dangled it like a test. We spoke about work, about books, about soup. We spoke as equals who had once been enemies but chose, stubbornly, to be kin again. On the first spring anniversary of my leaving, we walked by the daffodils we had planted. Their yellow had multiplied, a rebellion against bitterness. Rose touched one with her fingertip and whispered, "We survived each other." I nodded. Because sometimes the simplest sentences are the truest, I no longer thought of myself as missing. I was found in my own absence. The woman who had once lived only through management and martyrdom had become someone quieter, but freer. My daughter was learning that cruelty can be repented, that mothers can be women first, and that forgiveness is not owed but grown. We walked home slowly. Two women no longer pretending to be heroes or villains, just survivors planting hope. And for the first time in years, I felt not like a ghost in my own life, but like Elena Bell, 52, alive enough to keep beginning. Summer carried itself into town with long evenings and the sound of children chasing fireflies. By then, Rose visited often, not out of duty but out of choice. She would bring fresh bread from the bakery below her apartment and sit at my kitchen table, the one with 2 chairs and no ghosts. We spoke of small things, recipes, books, the way the river never stopped talking. Sometimes she stayed late, and we would walk together under the street lamps, saying nothing at all. Silence had become less of a punishment and more of a shared room we both understood how to inhabit. One Sunday, she brought me a letter folded in thirds. "It's from Dad," she said, eyes lowered. One I hadn't found before. It was tucked in the lining of a box. Her hands shook as I opened it. His words were simple: take care of each other, even when it feels impossible. Love is not a gift, it is a practice. We sat in silence, the letter between us. Rose finally whispered, "Maybe we've already started practicing." I reached for her hand. For the first time in years, she did not pull away. The past still lived with us, but it no longer ruled. What remained was choice. And day by day, we were choosing each other. But even as I write these words, I know the story doesn't truly end. Life rarely gives us neat endings wrapped in silence. Tomorrow the river will keep flowing, the daffodils will bloom and fade, and Rose and I will stumble, argue, laugh, and begin again. What matters is this: we are no longer afraid of each other. We no longer measure love in debts or inheritances. Instead, we measure it in cups of tea, in quiet evenings, in the courage to stay. And if one day someone asks me what became of Elena Bell at 52, I will answer simply, she learned that survival was not enough. She chose to live. She chose to love again.